Scientists have deployed 120 robot rabbits. Yeah, they're designed to look, move, and even smell like real marsh rabbits. The South Florida Water Management District and the University of Florida.
Florida has about 120 robot rabbits sitting in the Everglades tonight. $4,000 each, wrapped in waterproof fur, heated from the inside to the temperature of a living animal, twitching their ears in the dark to talk the largest snakes in the country out of hiding. Search this story, and you will be told the whole thing collapsed inside 3 days. That is not what happened. Something here did go horribly wrong, badly enough that people had to manufacture a prey animal to deal with it, and it happened a long time before anyone built a rabbit. The night shift.
Habitats they're using, what prey we might encounter, they might encounter, and so that might lead us to solutions to devise a better management, removal/control strategy, if we would.
Start with what is actually out there tonight, because the machine is stranger than the story people tell about it. They sit in wire pens in water nobody patrols, and every one of them is warmed from the inside to roughly 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Small motors twitch the ears and the head, the way an animal shifts when it is resting and not quite asleep. A solar panel keeps a camera running on every unit, and that camera does not blink, does not get tired, and does not walk past anything in the dark. Florida built a rabbit that cannot die. Here is the deal though. Nothing about that machine catches a snake.
With cameras, heat signatures, and actual marsh rabbit scent, they attract the pythons, allowing wildlife officers to swoop in and catch them.
It has no jaws, no snare, no cage that drops. When something long and warm slides out of the sawgrass and trips the sensor, the camera confirms it, and an alert goes out. It lands with Mike Kirkland, the South Florida Water Management District's lead invasive animal biologist, reachable at any hour, which in practice means a phone lighting up at 2 in the morning. Coordinates go to a removal contractor. Somebody puts boots on, gets in a truck, and drives out into the dark to do the part the machine cannot do. Roughly $4,000 a unit. 40 went in first, with the program scaling toward about 120. What most people do not realize is that the strangest thing here is not the machines. It is the reason they had to exist. But to understand why Florida had to manufacture a rabbit in the first place, start in 2012, more than a decade before the first machine went into the water. 95 collars.
Off the top at 5:30, scientists are learning invasive pythons in South Florida can eat bigger prey than they realized, and that includes an adult deer.
McCleary was trying to settle an argument. Biologists had been saying for years that Burmese pythons were emptying the marsh of mammals, and other scientists were pushing back that the evidence was thin. Most of it came from road surveys, people driving levees at night counting eyeshine. Roads are not marsh. Here is the deal. Neither side could see into the water, so he ran the cleanest test anyone could think of. He gathered 95 marsh rabbits, fitted each with a radio collar, and released them into python country in Everglades National Park. Marsh rabbits are ideal for this. They are the right size to interest a large constrictor, and they breed like the world is ending. 4 or 5 litters a year, up to 8 young in each. If any mammal out there could absorb heavy predation and keep going, it was this one. Then his team started walking the collars down. A collar keeps transmitting whether the animal is alive or not. That is the grim usefulness of the method. Over 11 months, the team tracked each signal to whatever was left and worked out how it died. Some were taken by bobcats, a few by other things. When the study was published in 2015, the number that mattered was this. Of the deaths they could assign a cause, roughly 77% were pythons. Not 77% of predation. 77% of everything that killed a rabbit in that marsh. And the signals kept coming after the rabbits were gone, because a collar swallowed by a snake keeps broadcasting from inside it. That is the walk this video opened on. Within about a year, the study area no longer held a rabbit population, and the most relentless breeder in the region had been erased faster than it could rebuild. He had gone in to measure a decline. He ended up documenting a disappearance, and there was nothing in his kit that could stop it. He could only write it down. So, how does an Asian snake end up eating its way through an American national park? How they got here.
A plot out of a horror film. Very large reptiles already capable of doing damage may be more dangerous than anyone thought. This is what's playing out in Florida.
The snakes did not swim to Florida. Python bivitatis is native to South and Southeast Asia, Burma, Thailand, Vietnam, southern China, the Indonesian archipelago. one of the largest snakes on Earth, and at home, it sits inside a system that spent millions of years arranging itself around it. Predators that take juveniles, prey that knows its shape. Take those constraints away and put the animal somewhere warm and wet with a mammal community that has never met a large constrictor. And what happens next is not a mystery. It is arithmetic. Through the 1980s and 90s, Miami was the front door of a booming exotic pet trade. Hatchlings arrived from Asian breeding operations, small enough to coil in a child's palm, and cheap enough to buy on impulse, with no meaningful import restrictions. Then the snakes did the thing snakes do. They grew. Adults here have been recorded past 18 feet and beyond 200 pounds. Nobody who bought a novelty pet was picturing that in the garage. So thousands of people drove to a canal, opened the door, and drove home. The snake becomes someone else's problem, and the someone else turns out to be a national park. There is a hurricane here too, and it is worth being careful with it. On the 24th of August, 1992, Hurricane Andrew came ashore near Homestead as a Category 5 storm and flattened a python breeding facility at the edge of the Everglades. Snakes went into the wild that night. That much is documented. What is often claimed on top of it, that Andrew alone created the invasion, is not what the genetics support. The population carries the signature of a small founding group plus repeated introductions, which points at the pet trade as the engine and the hurricane as one bad night inside a longer failure. And here is what turns a bad night into a permanent condition. South Florida is close to ideal for this animal. Year-round warmth matching its native climate, endless shallow water for ambush, prey with nothing in its instincts that says the log is not a log, and no native animal able to control an adult python once it passes a certain size. Then do the math. A large female lays dozens of eggs in a clutch, in some cases approaching 100, and incubates them by coiling around them and shivering, generating heat through rapid muscle contraction, unusual enough among reptiles to still surprise people who study them. Under those conditions, the population outruns any removal built at human scale. Estimates put the number of pythons in South Florida somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000. Nobody can count them. The estimate is inference stacked on inference. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe before you keep going. This channel goes into the places where the official version and the actual record stop matching, and there is more of that ahead in this one than you are expecting. And keep one thing in mind from here on, the version of the robot rabbit story you have probably heard, the one with the dramatic collapse, is not what the record shows. The failure that actually matters here is decades older than any machine. What the marsh lost. What the pythons did to the food web can be measured even where the pythons themselves cannot. A widely cited 2012 study compared nighttime mammal counts along park roads in the years before the pythons established against the years after. Raccoons down about 99%. Opossums down about 98%. Bobcats down about 87%. Marsh rabbits, the same species McCleary would later collar, not detected at all in the areas of longest python presence. That is an animal capable of killing an adult white-tailed deer, which biologists in the Everglades have now documented more than once, including a single snake found in 2013 with the remains of 3 deer inside it, a doe and 2 fawns, 12 hooves recovered from 1 fecal mass. Those are road counts, and the caveat matters. They are an index of how many animals were seen from a vehicle, not a census of the marsh. But the collar study is the reason the road numbers stopped being arguable. When you track individual animals to their deaths and the majority of them end up inside snakes, the survey debate closes. Then the damage moves outward, and this is the part that gets skipped. Fewer small mammals means less prey for red-tailed hawks, barred owls, and the wading birds the Everglades is famous for. And the predators that lived on rabbits and raccoons do not politely starve. They switch. They move on to bird nests, eggs, turtles, and smaller reptiles. So species that were never anywhere near a python start absorbing pressure they never evolved to handle. Meanwhile, the work those mammals were doing stops getting done. Seeds stop being spread. Carcasses sit in the water longer. An invasive predator does not simply subtract animals from a landscape. It rewires what is left. An ecosystem is not a list of species. It is a set of relationships, and the relationships are what came apart. A 1.5 million acre wetland, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of the most hydrologically delicate landscapes in North America, was being quietly reorganized from the inside by an animal nobody chose to put there on purpose, and the state of Florida knew it, had known it for years, and had been throwing everything it could think of at the problem. The crazy part is that none of it failed for the reason you would assume. Finding, not killing. Killing a Burmese python is not hard. They are large, slow on land, non-venomous, and once located, they can be handled by 2 trained people with rope and a bag. Florida has never had a killing problem. It has a finding problem, and the finding problem has never been solved. Burmese pythons are ambush predators whose entire survival strategy is stillness. They can hold position for weeks. Their brown and tan blotching against sawgrass, mud, and dried vegetation is not approximate camouflage. It is close to absolute. Experienced hunters have stood within a few feet of a 12-foot snake and registered nothing but ground. Trained searchers miss animals lying in the open repeatedly and know they are missing them. So, Florida threw a decade of ideas at it. In 2013, the state ran the Python Challenge, a public competitive hunt with cash prizes. Nearly 1,600 people signed up from dozens of states and waded into the swamp with headlamps and machetes in blistering heat for a month. The total take was 68 snakes. Against a population in the 6 figures, that is not a management action. It was an awareness campaign. And as an awareness campaign, it worked. The state moved to a professional model instead. The elimination program contracts licensed hunters, pays them hourly plus a bounty scaled to the size of the animal, and puts them on levees and canal banks at night when pythons move. It is more efficient than volunteers. It removes real animals. It still runs against reproduction rates that replace what gets taken. Then there are the scout snakes, which are the most elegant idea anyone has had here. Picture Ian Bartoshik and his team at the Conservancy of Southwest Florida, wading a cypress edge in the dark with a receiver, following a signal that is moving on its own. They implant radio transmitters in large male pythons and release them. During breeding season, a male follows pheromone trails to receptive females, because that is what he is built to do. The researchers follow the transmitter. The snake does the searching, and it does not miss what human eyes miss. That program has walked biologists straight into breeding aggregations and nesting sites no ground team would have found. And it has removed more than 20 tons of python from Southwest Florida, but every scout snake has to be caught, surgically implanted, tracked, and recovered. It covers a footprint measured in square miles. The Everglades is measured in millions of acres. It is a scalpel, and this is not a scalpel problem. Detector dogs came next, and they matter more than their numbers suggest. Dogs trained on python scent, the faint musky trace a snake leaves in grass and soil long after it has moved on, found animals visual searchers had walked past. Field teams reported dogs locating large pythons in ground already cleared by people who saw nothing. The dogs work in cooling vests and boots because Florida heat and sawgrass are dangerous to a working animal. They run short shifts, and there will never be enough of them to cover the landscape. But they proved the one thing that redirected everything after them. The snakes are not invisible. They are only invisible to human eyes. Approach the problem through chemistry and heat instead of light, and the animal that cannot be seen becomes an animal that can be called. Building the rabbit. To understand why a stuffed toy is a serious scientific instrument, you have to understand how a python reads the world. Vision is secondary. The primary channel is chemical. The forked tongue flicks constantly, collecting particles from the air and the ground and delivering them to the vomeronasal organ in the roof of the mouth, which reads them as a directional map. A python does not smell a rabbit the way you smell bread. It samples the air in stereo and works out which way the rabbit went. The second channel is heat. Along the jaw are pit organs, arrays of sensory tissue that detect infrared radiation, finely enough to resolve a warm body against cool background at night. In vegetation, with no light at all, a marsh rabbit runs at roughly 100 degrees Fahrenheit. In a dark, wet, ambient temperature marsh, that animal is a lit shape. So the logic follows almost mechanically. If a hunting python is drawn by a specific thermal signature and a specific chemical signature, and both can be manufactured, the snake can be persuaded to come to a known location at a known time. The obvious version of that idea is a live rabbit in a protected pen. It works in the sense that a frightened, warm animal produces exactly the cues a python is scanning for. It also puts a living creature in a box in a swamp as bait, indefinitely through a Florida summer, which raises welfare objections most people have on first hearing and practical problems in feeding it, watering it, and keeping it alive. Which is where McCleary ended up building something that has no nerve endings. Picture the bench. Commercially available plush toy rabbits, the kind sold in any store, opened up and gutted. Chris Dutton and McCleary at the University of Florida working through the insides of each one with wiring, motors, heating elements, a rechargeable power system, and a small solar panel, then sealing all of it against humidity, rain, and partial submersion, and rewrapping the whole thing in synthetic fur, treated to survive standing water. The heating element holds the surface near 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That number is the entire point. It is not decoration. It is the temperature that reads as prey to a pit organ. Small motors drive the ears and the head in the irregular twitch of an animal at rest, because a heat source that never moves is a rock, and a heat source that moves a little is food. The team has also worked on releasing rabbit scent from the units, the chemical half of the signal, since heat alone only solves part of the problem. Inside each one, a motion-triggered camera runs on solar power, flags a heat signature, and sends the alert. The units can sit out there for weeks untouched, roughly $4,000 apiece. The South Florida Water Management District, which coordinates invasive species work in the Everglades with state and federal partners, backed the pilot, and it went into the water in 2025. Roughly 40 units first, staked in protective pens across known python activity zones, scaling toward about 120. When a snake trips one, the alert reaches Kirkland and a contractor drives out. Fake prey, real camera, human with a truck. And that is the setup for the part where, according to almost everything you can find online, it all fell apart. What went wrong? Search this story online and you will find a version that goes like this. The robots worked brilliantly for 2 days. On the third day, an alligator destroyed one on camera. Then the alligators learned to hunt the pens, wrecked unit after unit. The pythons fled the area, the program collapsed, and an artificial intelligence system later mined the wreckage for secret python highways and led hunters through the dark to a nest of dozens of breeding females. None of that is in the record. There is no documented day 3 alligator, no alligator learning curve, no pythons fleeing the area, no program collapse, no machine learning ghost map, no discovered python corridors, no nest located by algorithm. Somebody wrote that story, and it spread because it has the shape audiences expect, which is a clean arc from failure into triumph. The true version is less cinematic and more uncomfortable. Results have not been published. The people running it have been open that they do not yet know whether the decoys will work at scale, which is precisely why it is a pilot. That does not mean nothing goes wrong out there. The predictable problems are real, and the team named them going in. A warm object emitting prey cues in the Everglades does not advertise itself only to pythons. Alligators, raccoons, bobcats, and birds of prey all read heat and movement, and anything that reaches a pen can damage a $4,000 machine. Sun, storms, flooding, humidity, and animals chewing on wiring are the ordinary enemies of electronics in a swamp. Every alert that turns out to be a raccoon is a contractor driving into the marsh at 2 in the morning for nothing. So, here is the honest version of what went horribly wrong in Florida. It was not the robots. It was not even the snakes. And that is putting it lightly, because the thing that actually failed here is sitting in plain sight in the design of the machine itself. The older failure. Go back to the rabbit for a second, not the machine, the animal. The reason this program exists is not that somebody thought robots were a clever way to catch snakes. It is that the marsh rabbit is functionally gone from the parts of the Everglades where pythons are densest. You cannot use real rabbits as attractants in a system that no longer has rabbits. The prey species is missing, so the prey species had to be manufactured. Think about what that actually means. Human beings imported an animal for entertainment, released it into a wetland through negligence and one bad hurricane, watched it eat the mammal community down to almost nothing, and then had to build a synthetic copy of one of the erased species in order to lure the thing that erased it. The robot is not a weapon, it is a headstone, and it is a headstone for a mistake that took 40 years and tens of thousands of individually reasonable decisions to make. A person who bought a small snake, a shop that sold it without a warning, a trade that moved millions of animals with no exit plan, a regulatory system that never once asked what happens if a Category 5 hurricane hits a breeding facility next to the largest subtropical wilderness in the United States. Nobody in that chain did anything dramatic. That is the point. Ecological disasters do not usually arrive as villains. They arrive as convenience, which leaves one question worth staying for. If the invasion cannot be undone, and everybody working on it knows that, what exactly are these people still doing out there at 2 in the morning? Holding the line. The last couple of years have genuinely gone better, and that deserves saying plainly because this is not a story where nothing works. In 2025, Florida formalized a partnership with a Miami company converting Everglades python skin into commercial leather goods. Removed snakes became raw material with a market value instead of carcasses to dispose of, and the economics of hunting shifted. That work has reached the fashion press, including collections from a well-known designer. And while a wallet does not solve an invasion, a better-paying bounty changes how many people are standing in black water on a Tuesday night. The totals moved with it. Bartoshik's Scout Snake program has crossed the 4-ton mark in a single season, taking well over 150 snakes from a study area of a couple hundred square miles. Contractor removals across South Florida have climbed year over year. Now the number nobody wants to build a thumbnail around. Since systematic removal began around the year 2000, roughly 23,000 pythons have been taken out of South Florida. The population estimate starts at 100,000. A single surviving female can lay dozens of eggs in a season. Do the math and you get the conclusion the people doing this work will say out loud if you ask them. Removal at current rates does not reverse an invasion this size. It slows it. Eradication stopped being the goal years ago. The goal is holding a line, protecting specific places, specific nesting colonies, specific species that would otherwise go under entirely. That is not defeatism. It is what containment looks like when the window for prevention closed 30 years ago. Which brings you back to the pens in the dark and to the 2 experiments this whole story is built on, 10 years apart. In 2012, a scientist put 95 living rabbits into the Everglades to find out what was happening, and the answer came back as silence on a radio frequency. He could only write it down. In 2025, the same man put a fleet of manufactured rabbits into the same water, warmed to the temperature of the animals that used to live there, and this time, the point was not to record a loss. Each pen is a detection node. Each alert is a snake a human being can actually reach. Given that finding pythons, not killing them, has always been the bottleneck, a cheap, patient, unblinking sensor that never gets tired and never walks past a snake. It cannot see as a serious answer to the real problem. Whether it works at scale is genuinely unknown right now, and anyone telling you otherwise in either direction is ahead of the evidence. But the deeper thing the robot rabbits reveal has already happened, and it cannot be undone. Something ate an entire prey community out of a national park, and the only way left to imitate what used to live there is with a motor, a heater, and a solar panel. If this is the kind of story you think more people should see, subscribe, and tell me one thing in the comments. If you had been standing in a Miami pet shop in 1990 with the power to stop one single decision in this whole chain, which one would you have stopped? And do you honestly think it would have been enough?